Hello everyone, if you're watching this, it's likely that you've seen some of my music videos on this channel, and I appreciate your tuning in for this one. I don't do a lot of videos where I speak. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is that I am not the most comfortable in the world public speaker, especially extemporaneously. Talking into a video is obviously not the same as talking in front of a crowd of people in terms of nerves, but there's something about presenting my ideas directly to people in spoken form that's a little intimidating, at least traditionally for me. Also, another reason why I don't do a lot of videos with me talking is that there's a quote that I would slightly alter that I think of. For a while, I was writing reviews of albums and things like that, and every time I struggled with what to write and what to say about music, I was reminded of a quote that's been attributed to a few different people, including Martin Mull, but I think it is probably older than Martin Mull. And the quote is that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. I almost want to change that to be talking about music is like dancing about architecture. It feels that way to me. I guess what I get from that is that I find spoken words fairly inadequate, at least coming from me, to sum up or to adequately express what happens in music, how it makes me feel. Even when I talk about music theory, it's really hard for me to find a way to help someone else understand what it is that I'm trying to convey, ideas wise, emotions wise. It's just tricky. So, bearing all that in mind, I thought I would come and talk a little bit about Brian Wilson. It's about a little bit more than a week after his passing, and I've seen there's a lot of tributes. I've put up a couple of videos with music. Obviously, if you have watched anything on my channel, you know that I am highly inspired and heavily influenced by Brian Wilson, as probably 2/3 of my content is Brian Wilson based or oriented. So that's a lot. That's a lot of music. That's a lot of influence. That's a lot of videos. That's a lot of inspiration. And as I say, words are not particularly adequate for conveying. I just thought I would tell a little information about how I came to know the music of Brian Wilson. I grew up in Southern California, and I was the youngest of three. And my sisters are 7 and 9 years older than I am. Because I was literally the baby of the family, I would sometimes hear music that my sisters would play. I would also listen to a lot of records that my parents had in their collection, including some classical and jazz, and I think they had a couple Beatles albums and Stones albums and things like that, but they weren't exactly into modern pop. They were probably more the beatnik / folky era. My parents were, so they had a lot more stuff that was oriented towards that. So I'm not sure whose records we had, but we did have 2 Beach Boys records that I grew up listening to. And I was 5 or 6. I remember hearing these on my record player. One of the albums was Beach Boys Concert, the live album from 1964. And the other one was Summer Days and Summer Nights, the studio album from 1965. I think it had California Girls and Help Me Rhonda on it. I definitely remember listening to those 2 records quite a bit, along with a number of other things that I listened to when I was a kid. And especially the second one, Summer Days and Summer Nights. I think after listening to it a few times, something happened to me, And I don't know if I really understood it when I was a kid, and I'm not even sure if my memories of it are completely sound, but I was hearing melodies, harmonies, and textures, chords, something that felt very fun, lively, and energetic, yet also kind of otherworldly. And, many people feel that today, the albums today and Summer Days and Summer Nights are sort of the stepping stones to Pet Sounds. And I would agree with that for the most part. I would say that Summer Days and Summer Nights probably is when Brian learned to use the studio as its own instrument, or as its own member of the Beach Boys band. The soundscapes are breathtaking and so innovative and strange. I'm not saying that every single song on Summer Days and Summer Nights is incredible. You could make the argument that there's a little bit of unevenness there, but for the most part, the tone painting and the soundscapes are just stunning. And they did something to my brain. They wired me in a certain way where I wanted to hear every single detail in the soundscape, in the mix. I wanted to know what every sound was. As I was learning to play music and sing music as I got a little bit older, I wanted to know what every note was. And I guess what I'm describing sounds a little obsessive, and maybe it was, but there was something that made me want to hear everything that Brian Wilson did in those recordings. Many years later, I found out what Pet Sounds was, and when the Pet Sounds box sessions came out in the late 90s, I sort of went down the rabbit hole of listening to all the instrumental backing tracks and vocal tracks, backing vocal tracks and lead vocal tracks, and sort of trying to figure out what everything was and what the music theory of it all was and how to play it on piano, as I've now learned to do. And in some cases I can sing it, although, to be honest, Brian's voice is much higher than mine. His falsetto is much more developed than mine ever could be. I'm sort of a baritone and stuck with that voice range and limitation. But yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is that while I've never been able to really write my own music, and I'm not going to get into why that is, but I do find myself drawn to what I would call Baroque pop music. And by Baroque, I just mean like intricate and complex and highly detailed. And when it comes to that style of music, I just don't see that there's anybody else who's done nearly as much as Brian Wilson. I mean, I could look at some classical or jazz artists or composers and talk about them on a similar level, but I feel like what Brian has done and has given me and given us is immense. And I knew he wouldn't be able to live forever. I've known for decades that he would have to pass on one day, and now that he has, I mean, I'm grateful for what he did and what he's given us. I am sad that he apparently suffered a lot. I'm not the world's foremost expert on his personal life, because as sad as I found what I knew about him, I sort of balked at the culture that we have about I guess I feel like we as a society feel like we deserve to know all of these personal details of people who are celebrities in our culture. And I found that personally a little distasteful, meaning that I didn't feel like I had the right to know about Brian's personal suffering, or anybody's really, unless they were my friend and they were telling me the things that they were going through. Nevertheless, what I did know about his suffering, I did have empathy for. And sometimes when Brian would write songs that were sad and melancholy, or even joyful, because he found a lot of joy somehow despite his experiences, a lot of that emotional writing of Brian's really spoke to me, and still does. I'm grateful that he managed to make lemonade out of his lemons, and he will always be one of my favorite musicians and creators, and I'm sorry that he's gone. Thank you for listening to all this, and take care.